The trouble is that people tend to think that you've got to think the same way. Now, I get a lot of trouble from fellow conservatives, because I'm a conservative in most senses of the word, especially when it comes to moral issues. But then I start speaking out in favour of the environment and global warming and stuff, and people criticise me and they say, oh no, you should hold the line.
Okay, so we're here with another episode of the Jimscast, and now we're going to talk about something you're very passionate about, Jim, which is global warming and the environment, which is quite topical, obviously, with the protests from the young people recently, which held protests all around the place about it. So maybe you want to tell us about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, you can look at it at three different levels. One's personal, one's business, and one's in terms of public policy. On a personal level, I do my best to live in a sustainable way. For example, we feed food scraps to our chickens, and we eat a lot of eggs from those, and give a lot away too, because we have so much. Try not to eat meat. We will not eat any beef in our house at all, because beef is terrible. Cows are terrible for the environment. They belch methane, they destroy the land, and they're also bad for health. So a diet that's mainly vegetarian, which is what I eat, is better for health, better for the environment. That's for a start too. We try and keep costs down, like turning off lights. The kids actually have a system where they sort of get fined if they leave the lights on, or they have to pay fines to each other. So it's kind of like an incentive system. So I'm always going on them about things, and you're turning off the heater when we don't need it.
So even in the national office, you do that. You're notorious for that.
Yes.
Come and turn the lights on. Who left the lights on? Who left the heater on? You go and turn it off.
Yeah, that's right. So I try to teach my kids. They're all keen on global warming environment, but they don't often relate to the practicality of how you keep your own costs down, your own carbon footprint down. And obviously we have solar panels wherever we can, and we generate our own electricity. My great aim down the track a bit, when electric cars become more reasonable in price, which only probably in the next couple of years, I want to buy an electric car and I want to charge it recharge with solar energy from my own farm, so I'd have a zero carbon footprint on my driving.
Right.
I don't drive a lot, but I'd really love to be able to never buy petrol again.
But you won't buy a Tesla at the moment because they're too expensive, right? You want the cost to come down.
Tesla's too expensive, but it's coming down. They're all making electric cars. I think that's going to be fantastic. I love the idea of electric cars. Every time you go into a petrol station, you're buying this petroleum and so forth.
Well, did you see Mercedes the other day announced that they've stopped developing petrol engines? Made a decision. I think it was just yesterday or a couple of days ago.
I think it's great. It's getting there. It's getting there. The costs are coming down all the time. I reckon next 2-3 years you'll see a reasonably priced electric car, and it'll be great. And I really, really want to have no coal or anything, just purely solar to power my car. Because I drive to the farm at least once a week, and so I can just charge it there while I'm up there.
How would you do with the battery? Because obviously there's a Tesla battery where they store the power. That's probably been the problem with them, is the batteries, the storage for it.
Battery is the problem. Battery technology's become better all the time. That's a very encouraging thing. It's coming down all the time, quite fast. Battery is the biggest problem. The power itself is actually, at the farm we generate more power than we actually use, and they don't give you a rebate for it, so it's a bit annoying. So if I could store the power and use it to drive my car, that'd be great. So that's on the personal level. On the business level, I'm actually, in my farm, there's 100 acres of what used to be cattle, fairly degraded cattle land. What we're doing is turning into an organic food orchard. So we're planting thousands of trees of all kinds of nuts and fruits and everything else, all totally organic, and we're going to turn the whole area into a environmentally friendly place where you can actually grow far more food per hectare than you can with cattle farming. And it's well watered. It's the land's been degraded. They actually stripped off a lot in the past to take to the city to put in their gardens, which really annoys me. I just discovered that. But we're going to restore the fertility of the soil. We're bringing that back. Also grow as much as possible of my own food. So we've got some big potato patches and corn and pumpkins and things like that we're growing. Eventually I'd like to grow most of my own food as well. So also in terms of Jim's group, we are very heavily committed to, particularly with the mowing division, we're working with a battery powered company in terms of making battery powered mowers. And we're actually, in my factory in Bayswater now, we're developing a trailer that can generate its own power for the battery, which can power the mowers. using a solar panel on the roof of the trailer.
So the plan is, yes. So for the mowing trailers that you'll see on the road, obviously there's a side panel there that they have the batteries up there, which would be charging as it goes around and driving, right?
Yeah. So that should be ready in a couple of weeks. And I would eventually like to see all my franchisees driving electric cars, obviously, but certainly in terms of the equipment and stuff. Electric has actually great advantages. I use battery to mow the lawns on my farm. I use a battery mower, electric mower, which is powered again by the solar panels on the roof, and it's recharged the batteries from that. And I love using it. It's very quiet. It's safer because after you go over, say, the gravel, you can just pull it off, and the blades stop turning, and it's really nice to use. I love.
The problem is the batteries, though, isn't it? You have to go through a few batteries.
Yeah, I do spend a bit of batteries, actually. I want to try this new one on the farm to see how long that'll last for. I'm told the batteries can last for about an hour, and then if you can just change them over. So it's really quite practical. It's a good way of doing it. And actually, the great thing about the battery-powered stuff is that not only is it's quieter, there's less vibration. It doesn't upset people in the environment with the noise, but it's also they're lower. They're more durable. They don't wear out so much, and it's very nice too. When you want to fix an electric a battery, but you just turn it like that. You don't have to worry about flooding the parts or anything like that. And you can just turn it over. So they're great to use, easy to start. I love those machines. I think that's the future for Jim's mowing in particular. We want to do that. So, in terms of policy, here my idea is probably a bit more controversial. I think global warming is a really, really, really serious issue. And I think it's something that our government doesn't do enough to address. And I think the kinds of policies that we have are feeble. One of the things that I most object to, now I take advantage of it myself because I've got, obviously we use the solar subsidies to put panels up wherever we can. But that's a very inefficient way of controlling greenhouse gases. By far a better way is a very heavy carbon tax. And what should happen, the moment the problem is, you have these solar panels, and what they do is they charge the electricity company. And electricity companies then put up the price of power for everybody. Now the problem with that is that people who can afford to put up solar panels are people like myself who are pretty well off. So we get a subsidy, but people who don't own their own house actually have a massively high power bill. So what you're doing is you're distributing wealth from the poor to the rich, which is the opposite of what any decent system should do. And it's also very inefficient because it's far more efficient to have a carbon tax where people make their own decisions about how to save energy. For example, you may want to put a solar panel off, but you may also want to put double glazing in, or insulation, or turn the lights off, or have more efficient bulbs. There's many. In fact, the best way to save energy is not to actually create more sustainable power, but to use less power overall. So it's actually, and this is just basically from the economists, there's nothing radical about this at all. The most efficient way to reduce our carbon footprint is actually a carbon tax, and the fairest way is to distribute the proceeds back to the people. So actually people get a credit to help pay for it, which actually means that people who are poorer are actually better off.
So do you think that it's just being used as, let's say, a political football? And obviously there's people who might say climate change deniers or whatever, or argue for the science because it might be a popular thing to do in their electorate or whatever. I won't use North Queensland as an example, but I'll say I watched a few Qandas, and it always seems to be a Queensland senator arguing with the scientist on the panel and trying to argue against the science, which I think is quite unbelievable. But do you think it's more if they just do it out of a populist or trying to win votes, which is why it's so inefficient in the policy, or?
And people aren't prepared to make the hard decisions. And basically there's too much power to the elites and people who are wealthy and running things to suit themselves and not to have efficient policy.
Would you find it amazing that a lot of the people in the Senate or the House of Reps whatever can't take advice from scientists? Because that's the one thing I find amazing. When you watch these debate shows, they'll bring on, let's say, a world-known scientist, let's say Brian Cox or something, with all this statistical data, and you've got some guy up in Queensland, this senator, who can barely put a sentence together trying to argue against this guy who studies this sort of stuff. And that's the thing that I find frustrating for me, is that these political people can't take the right advice from the data, and that's what I find frustrating.
The trouble is that people seem to think that you've got to think the same way. Now, I get a lot of trouble from fellow conservative, because I'm a conservative in most senses of the word, especially when it comes to moral issues. But then I start speaking out in favour of the environment and global warming and stuff, and people criticise me and say, "Oh no, you should hold the line."
Yeah,
if you believe that for example, men shouldn't be allowed to use women's change rooms, which I firmly do, because I don't want men using my daughter's change rooms. Therefore, I'm a conservative, so I've got to think that there's no such thing as global warming, and that's just insane.
Yeah, and this is the problem I have.
Because the science is pretty clear. It is causing... You can't double the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and not have some effect on the environment. It's just ridiculous to think that's the case. And we know from the past, too, there's been ages when carbon dioxide has been higher and it's warmer. And you look at somewhere like Venus, which has got, it's like about 800 degrees because of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's obvious that we're warming the planet. We're obviously causing damage. And I think we've got to deal with that clearly and properly. I just don't understand conservatives sometimes, because one of the issues too is that conservatives ought to be concerned about security. And it's one of the problems. We import all this oil from the most stable and dangerous place on the planet, which is the Middle East. All this attack on the Saudi oil fields lately. I mean, it's very, very vulnerable. How can we feel comfortable with that? Wouldn't it be so much better if we focused on our own internal sources of power?
Which is why the aversion to nuclear power baffles me, because it's such a great...
Well, that's the other point too, and this is one of the areas where I will do battle with the Greens, because nuclear power is actually a very safe, effective form of power. Nuclear energy per kilowatt actually causes a lot less deaths than, say, coal or almost anything else, because there's relatively few accidents. And when there are, it's things like where you build a nuclear reactor at Fukushima, which is in one of the most unstable countries on Earth, which is Japan, and next to an ocean which is well known to be a source of tsunamis. Now, Australia is completely the opposite. We are the most stable continent on Earth, and in most of the country there's no risk of tsunamis at all. And also we've got plenty of land where we can store the wastes and so forth, and where we can site these things. So Australia is an incredibly obvious place. If we're serious about global warming, and I think it's a serious problem, some people would say it doesn't matter too much, it won't cause too much harm. I think that's rubbish. I think there really is a huge problem with global warming, and we really have to do something about it. Now, solar power is great, and I think it's becoming more affordable, it's becoming better, but it's episodic. It doesn't happen at night. There's problems with batteries. I think to put our whole future on the basis that we think the technology will improve enough, the solar power will save us, is a pipe dream. Nuclear is potentially cheap power and safe power, and we know that it'll solve the problem. And Australia's got plenty of uranium too. We could be an energy superpower. We could be actually turning water into hydrogen and ammonia and exporting that to the rest of the world and solving people's problems all over the place.
Do you think the aversion to it is based on, let's say, fear from, let's say, for Chernobyl, right? So every time anyone talks about nuclear, they bring up Chernobyl, right? We don't know the Chernobyl. Do you think that that's where the real fear and aversion comes to it from?
Yeah,
or?
Well, you look at nuclear power used in the worst way. Chernobyl, the Soviet Union, incredibly inefficient, no public supervision, very loose attitude towards safety. The stuff that happened there when Chernobyl went off, the way that the workers, so many of them died because they just were exposed to radiation. They just didn't care about people very much. How different is that the way we do it? And I said the other example is Fukushima and this kind of thing. But my goodness, what a dumb place to build a nuclear power plant. There's so much of Australia which would be 1,000 times better. So people choose these extreme examples of bad nuclear planning, and they just forget about the damage. I mean, the seas rise by 10 meters, 15 meters. You're going to half of Bangladesh is underwater. Whole countries are going to go beneath the sea.
I think Mauritius and Kiribati and all those sort of places, 100 years will be disappearing due to the water level rising. So
yeah. So I think nuclear power really should be in the mix, and I think we should be investing in that and learning how to do it more cheaply and more safely and more efficiently. And we should be helping to make the world a better place. I can see great uses for it. If nuclear power was cheap enough, we could use it for desalination of seawater, for example, and we could make the deserts bloom. We could have, masses of tropical forests and food forests, in what's now large parts of desert in the country. We could do magnificent things if we had enough power.
It's just another reason why you like Monty Burns, isn't it? Have your own nuclear plant. You can have your own one, right? For people watching who don't know, Jim loves Monty Burns, so this is just another...
Yeah, well, there's
maybe a bit more. You wouldn't have Homer as your safety inspector, though. Would someone a bit more high level?
No, I think Homer Simpson. I would not employ him for safety inspection. Now, the other thing I wanted to say too about so many of the policies that are supposedly green are actually very bad for the environment. And one of the principal ones is this business about zoning. And in Victoria, we call it green wedge. I don't know what it is in other states, but what it means is you've laid vast areas of the city that you can't subdivide the land. Like here, where we are now in Mooroolbark, you can walk and you can. There's farms all over the place. There's 5-acre covenants. Like our house next door, you can't divide below 5 acres. Now this is wonderful for millionaires because this is a great property. We're only sort of 7 minutes from the station. There's shops, there's schools, there's all kinds of facilities. And we have these vast acres. Millionaires like myself have these vast acreages, which we couldn't afford to buy if they're properly priced. And that's terrible for the environment because what it means is it pushes up the price of housing in the cities. And then people have to travel great distances. So if you go out to satellite towns of Melbourne, say, it's 5:30 in the morning, you'll see these vast numbers of cars driving the city, burning billions of tons producing billions of tons of carbon dioxide, spewing into the air because they can't afford to live in the cities because the cities are so restrictive to making housing so expensive. It's insanely un-green policy. It makes so much more sense to allow the cities to become dense. And this is the argument for The Economist too. Economist is a very, very green magazine, but it's also speaking very strongly. It's a wonderful magazine too. Also speaks very strongly about the need for more affordable housing. It's so unfair that people can't afford to buy a house. So it's kind of like the same policy, which is restricting covenants on land, actually put enormously more carbon dioxide into the air. They speed up global warming. At the same time, they make housing unaffordable. It's wrong on every sense of the word. And that's what annoys me is people like the Greens who are supposedly in favour of the environment. They support policies which are dreadfully destructive to the environment. And if anybody's watching this who's a Greens voter, go and talk to your party and tell them to get some sensible policies that really protect the environment. They'd be worth voting for.
Yeah, don't inbox the social pages because I'll get that one. So, but it's quite funny because in the regional areas, because I grew up in Warrnambool, which is a country town, it's heavily based on dairy farming. So a lot of dairy farms in. Greens will never ever win there. It's always Liberal or be by Labor. It's quite funny that the actual in the regional areas, which have all the, let's say the farms, the environment, and all that sort of stuff there, you never see really a green member or green representative at all. They tend to get shot down very heavily. It's always Liberal or Labor in those areas. So it's quite funny.
But I think many green policies, like I'm talking about, are very destructive to ordinary people. And I don't favour the Greens as a party. The only thing the Greens will be very good for our business, because they've gotten to power, then the economy will go into a tailspin and we'll be able to sell a lot more franchises.
But let's say, people don't realise we're actually around 50 k's east of Melbourne, and Jim, you have a massive complex here, and you've got all native. You've had to plant native trees, and you've planted a lot of them. So
yeah, we've planted, I don't know, thousands of native trees. We've also chosen a lot of trees that attract birds.
Yeah, so you have a lot of animals, like there's obviously possums and all sort of stuff. And
yeah, and beautiful flowering gums.
Yeah.
So you see beautiful parakeets and rosellas all over the place in this property. It's really very nice, actually. I love native vegetation myself. I really enjoy it. I've spent time in the bush. Always did.
So what countries do you think do it really well? Because I know from an outside look, in Germany obviously has a lot of, when you go there's a heap of wind farms, for example. It's a bit funny with here, don't make the Australian scene, so they don't use much wind farms. But in Germany, wind farms literally everywhere. You've got Netherlands, those sort of places. Which country do you think is doing it pretty well?
Well, the Europeans are obviously ahead of the scale in these kinds of areas. They have a lot of good ideas. Wind farms have got a problem too, though, because wind power is relatively economical in the right sense. It's actually one thing that competes with fossil fuels fairly well. But the trouble with that is that there's limited places that you can put them because they can be very destructive to the environment. Like they kill a lot of birds, like eagles and so forth. So, in a sense, though, it's good to have them. There's also environmental costs and also the sheer visual intrusion in the community. That's why, to me, things like solar power and nuclear power are far better options because there really isn't any negative to the environment. I mean, wind has its place, but it's never going to replace fossil fuels. But nuclear, solar, potentially could.
So, what do you think the next 20 years will look like? Do you think the governments will eventually have to just relent to the power, because you'll have the demographic, let's say my age or my generation is sort of the ones who are probably a bit more concerned with it, actually moving into those positions of power, then getting real. Do you think there'll be enough time, or how much damage will be done, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd like to think that we're gonna get a handle on this. I mean, the great thing about it, one of the things that'd be nice to do, if you did do a carbon tax, apart from compensating people so that they're not worse, ordinary people aren't worse off, what we should do is put a lot more money into research. We should be really heavily subsidising any research into renewable power, because that is the best way to do it.
Well, I think it's quite frustrating. It's just like with technology, obviously you get better, let's say phones, for example, right? The first phones, and obviously costs come down. But it's quite frustrating for me because I love electric cars too. I'd love a Tesla, but to buy a Tesla, like it's just like you want to do the right thing, but you just can't. And that's the problem. But the technology cost will come down eventually, but you have to wait, and then all that damage is done. Well, I just don't see where. I just don't see a solution in the short term for people, for the average person to really get really environmentally friendly, unless they make those changes, like you said, if they actively stop eating meat for those reasons and all that sort of stuff. I think, I just think it's for let's say for someone who might not be well off, it's sort of financially, it's not feasible for them to really do those sort of things.
Yeah, it's all very well people who are plenty of money and surplus cash and stuff to be talking about those kind of things. Don't mind you, beef is pretty expensive sort of meat. I think it's disgusting. Actually, I don't even like the taste.
Well, I love beef. I love my beef, so
it's very bad for the environment. It's very bad for you, and it's actually interesting that the more you go towards environmentally sensitive eating, the better your health's likely to be.
Well, have you seen that? It was a fake meat company or synthetic meat company that listed recently on the New York Stock Exchange. Went gangbusters. Sorry, they're basically petri dish, steaks, you want to call them like that. So synthetic meats is something that is coming in, but like the whole veganism movement for environmental reasons seems to be kicking up a lot. Obviously when you buy, I buy a lot of protein and stuff now. It's all vegan. It's all plant based. I know that there's a grilled burger chain are all doing now plant based beef.
They're very nice actually.
Yeah.
Are they really?
Yeah. They've started moving towards it. So.
Oh well, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I like their burgers, but I only had the veggie burgers, of course.
Yeah. So they started introducing vegan patties or whatever they are, like replicating meat, but they're all vegan, all plant-based patties and stuff. Now you'll find that a lot of actual chains eventually will relent and will start be doing that. So it'll be quite interesting to see what happens, and obviously the environmental toll. But I come from an area of dairy farmers, so they're probably the complete opposite. So.
Well, I'm not very great. Dairy farmers won't like me. We drink soy milk in my house.
Oh, do you?
I don't.
No good.
I like cheese though. We have cheese. We had pizza last night. It was really nice. A really nice sort of Mediterranean vegetarian pizza.
Warrnambool cheese and butter. It's the best in the world. It's a Saputo group owned it down in Warrnambool. So there is one now. 'Cause a lot of my cousins and uncles are dairy farmers back home. So I'm quite sort of hooked into it. And it'd be cool. Well, what do you think then? Let's say, for example, let's say in terms of policy, let's say all these beef. Let's say, for example, beef is on the decline, all these farms start closing down. We're going to have all this land, for example. What do you think is going to happen there? If, say, dairy farmers start selling up, have all this land in the regional areas, what do you think will happen there?
Well, the point of it is that you can grow, if you want to use land productively, trees are actually the best way to do it, food-bearing trees. If you actually plant certain kinds, and there's some beautiful Australian, like bunya pines, which are produce very, very nutritious nuts. And actually, in terms of useful calories per hectare, these are many, many, many times more efficient.
So you think it might be just a shift in what they would obviously.
Vegetarian food's really nice. I don't. I suppose it's the way you talk yourself into it. But I really like the taste of, and not even fake meat. I like stuff that's actually vegetarian, like a nice Mediterranean pizza, which isn't particularly healthy, I suppose, because it's got a lot of cheese and stuff.
You have a lot of pizzas, though. You like your pizza?
I love pizzas. Yeah. A really nice pizza is as good as anything. You go out there. It's not expensive too. We went out last night with our family. We spent $40. It was a nice meal. And we had a bit of left over from the pizza, so we brought it back and fed it to the chooks this morning. It's
sort of interesting. It seems to be like a political affiliation with, honestly, like, let's say with vegan. I know you're more conservative, but with veganism, for example, someone who's a veganism or whatever, say with the Greens, then say someone who's a Liberal or Labor or whatever it is, meat. It's sort of weird how it sort of shifted into those. You're a bit different to the norm, but the popular stuff, if you would look online, would be sort of fielded that way. So
you're supposed to stick to your tribes, and the whole country and the whole world is becoming more polarized these days between your right and your left, or however you define it. And I refuse to be bound by what.
Yeah, you sort of shift, don't you? You're sort of over here, then you're at, well, basically to popular convention would be like all group of that stuff is over here or group here. But you're sort of, if you think it's right, you're in here or you're in here. Or...
When it comes to moral issues, like as I said, men using women's change rooms, I'm very, very conservative. When it comes to other issues like the environment, obviously I'm what most people would see as on the other side, but also when it comes to things like the gap between rich and poor, which I'd love to talk about sometime. Sure. I am very much in favour of a more equal society. I think our society is very so. Yeah, probably not be easy to categorise, but to me, you've got to read and make up your own decision. I mean, I read everything. I read The Economist, I read New Scientist, I read The Guardian, I read the ABC, I read the left, I read the right, I read everything. And I get information from all over. And you make up your own mind about what's important to you and what you value.
Mm. So where do you think we'll get at the top of this problem in 10 years, 20 years? Can you see any hope for it, or you don't think it will do much change? Because I think people from, look, I'm not saying this is everyone, but seems to be my generation seems to take it a bit more seriously. I think obviously, I'm 31 now, so by the time people like me would ever get into politics, be like the 50, that's 20 years, right? So 15 to 20 years maybe we start seeing some real changes happening, or do you think it'll be sooner than that?
Look, if people can develop the will and if technology improves well enough, but it does depend so much on the policy decisions we make. Are we going to maintain our ridiculous aversion to nuclear power? If we do, then there's a very good chance that we won't meet the problem. If we adopted proper policies and proper thinking, like carbon taxes, properly compensated for people, which would be politically more acceptable, then I think potentially we could.
What about a world solution then? Because obviously if we do all this good work down here, and you've got China, for example, or India, for example...
Well, China's got massive problems with pollution. They're really, really concerned about all the coal burning and people...
Oh, it's a disgrace. Have you ever been? Oh, you've been there, haven't you?
No, not recently, no. I only went, last time I went was 18 years ago. But they're very concerned about pollution. If there was cost-effective ways of doing things, like if we had... solar energy becoming much, much more efficient, batteries becoming more cheaper and efficient, if we had nuclear power becoming, more widespread and more efficient and cheaper, if we have these kinds of policies developed in the wealthiest countries, then countries like India and China would look at that and say, well, why would we want to burn coal when we can actually do it better with solar or nuclear, or whatever the better options are? And I think if we can lead with the technology and show the technology, people don't want to learn, because coal it's disgusting stuff. I mean, I know a few people who are involved in the industry, but it's very, very damaging to the environment. It produces pollution, especially in third world countries. It's very inefficient. It produces a lot of carbon dioxide. It's far worse than, say, gas even, and obviously vastly worse than solar or nuclear. And it's also quite a dangerous activity too. A lot of people get killed mining coal. It's far more dangerous than something like nuclear energy is. So,
what do you think about the problem in Adelaide, though? Obviously, South Australia has the largest battery, whatever it is,
which keeps the state going for about half an hour.
That's what I'm saying. So that's the problem, because you're going to have that, and then you're going to have all the other people on the other side argue and say, well, look at that, we need to have this.
Well, what you've got is lunatic green thinking, which basically doesn't look at the most efficient way, which is the carbon tax type approach, which would simply naturally tend to push energy into the best areas. And they use sort of artificial government. We're going to shut down this power plant. We're going to do that. We're going to do that without any concern for the consequences. And then you have brownouts and stuff. And the trouble is that kind of stupid thinking actually is not only inefficient, but it also turns people against it.
And that's what I'm trying to say. That's what I think's been
because
bad
they see their power bills go up and up and up and up and up and up all the time, and they blame the environmentalists who are doing this. But you don't need to do that. If you had a carbon tax and you raise the price, but then you get this big, great money going into your bank account, which is the compensation for that. You say, wow, fantastic. I love green policies. They're great because they actually help me, not just the plutocrats. What really annoys me, though, is the most strident greenies are often the worstest for the environment. And I don't want to mention too many names, but you look at
well, here we go.
Look at Prince Harry and Meghan, for example. Okay, they're going on and on about how the environment is so important. What do they take? 11 flights in private jets, even to go on a holiday, for heaven's sake. Or Prince Charles, who's who's known for private jets and extravagant use, got 5 vast mansions, bleeds carbon dioxide all over the place, and then tells the rest of the planet you're supposed to tighten your belt.
But they purchase a carbon offset though. When you go on the flights that purchase.
Oh, that's all garbage. Who knows what that means?
It's a joke.
It's a joke, and I get very annoyed. And you get someone like the Queen, whom I greatly respect. I think we should be a republic. But anyway, that's a different topic.
Yeah.
But the Queen I greatly respect. I mean, she's the kind of... She'll go in a train up to Balmoral. Or they'll fly... Or Prince William, for example, and Kate will tend to fly commercial. I mean, it's just that... It seems to me the more loudly you speak about the damage to the environment, the more damage you actually personally think you're allowed to do. So I preach enough hot air about the environment. It doesn't matter how many tons of carbon dioxide I actually personally contribute because listen to what I say, not what I do. That really, really annoys me. I tell you what, if Prince Charles outlives the Queen, we should be a republic. I really have no time for that guy.
I think we'll leave it there. It's been what.